glad I didn't have to do this like Keisha did this morning. There's a lot more people there. So like the preacher mentioned, my name's Keith Jones. My family is, my wife's Vanya, and then we have 4 kids, Amelia, Levi, Teddy, and Sybil. We live in Richmond and have pretty much since we've been married. I have I'm one of 3 siblings. I'm the youngest. My brother lives in Alabama, and then my sister is Miss Falconberry. So for anybody that didn't know that. My parents grew up in West Virginia, in the mountains of West Virginia. Never really went to church a lot. My mom said, this was actually really good for me because I kind of interviewed my mom to get some backstory from there. And she said that she remembered going to a little country church one time, and she remembered going forward during a revival service or whatever they called it at the time. But she kind of just went forward because that's what everybody was doing. And she said she even remembered asking her sister, why are we going forward? And they just said, well, that's what you do to be saved. There was no Bible. There was no really, it was just, you go forward. And so that was really the only experience with church that she had growing up. And then as they were married, my dad was out of college, was a civil engineer, and his job was construction sites. So construction site that would change a lot. They moved from West Virginia to Maine. So that was their first move as a married couple, and then moved all over the place, mostly East Coast states. And as they moved around, they ended up in Albany, Georgia. And as they moved around a lot, they didn't really have a lot of friends because they moved a lot. But they had a couple that my dad worked with, and they were friends. And the lady invited her to church. So she began going to church. My dad didn't really go to church at the time. And she went to a Bible study, and she said that during that Bible study, she realized what salvation was. She said she didn't really remember what denomination it was. It's kind of irrelevant, right? As long as it's the Bible. Yeah. And so she realized from a Bible study that she wasn't saved. And she said that she just prayed on her own one night and was saved.
Amen.
They weren't there a whole lot longer. They moved to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And there they had some neighbors that came over and introduced themselves and invited them to church. It was their first introduction to an independent fundamental Baptist church.
Amen.
My dad still didn't really go to church much. And then again, as they were gonna be moving again, he may be on a project for 9 months, for a year. So they moved a lot. And as they were going to move again, their friends there told them, hey, we know of this church in Murfreesboro. That's where they were moving, to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. We know of this church, Franklin Road Baptist Church, and that would be a good one for you to look up. Well, again, my dad wasn't really going to church at the time, and my mom went. But so when they moved, it wasn't like they were really focused on, we got to find this church. Well, again, they had a neighbor that came over and introduced themselves, and it was a traveling evangelist out of Franklin Road Baptist Church. So they knew about this church. They hadn't really looked it up, but God sent somebody by their house that lived in that neighborhood. And those people they still keep in touch with today, are lifelong friends of theirs. But in Franklin Road Baptist Church, again, Dad still wasn't really in church much, but when they went to Murfreesboro, he started attending, and it was just, my mom said it was just a month or two that they had one of their big conferences, and my dad was saved at that time. And then at the time, Dr. Curtis Hudson was the pastor there. She said that Dr. John R. Rice's widow was there at that time, and she said that was their first introduction to Jack Hyles and a lot of the independent fundamental movement that a lot of us know of, and people that we know of. So I believe that they moved there in 1981. So in 1984, I was born there in Murfreesboro. And I was only about 6 weeks old, and they moved again from Murfreesboro. I can't remember exactly where they moved after that. They moved about 4 more times, and then they moved to Berea, Kentucky, just south of here. And I was 3, almost 4. So they moved 4 times in another 3 or 4 years, and landed in Berea. And when they landed there, they started to kind of decide, hey, we've got 3 kids. We need to try and settle down as much as we can. And they decided that they would settle in Berea, find a church, and then there was a recycling plant in Berea that we moved there for. And then that project was over in a couple of years. So after that, my dad decided I'll just have to travel. And so really my whole childhood, my dad was gone 4 to 5 days a week. He was usually gone Monday through Thursday, sometimes Monday through Friday. But that's just what they did so that we, could be settled. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so that we didn't have to continue to travel. When they moved to Berea, of course, they knew they needed a church, and this was before the internet. So they knew they needed to look up a church, but it was kind of, resources were a little more limited then. So they looked up a church, but they couldn't find it. They really couldn't locate it, didn't know where it was. But one day they were driving, just kind of new to the area, and passed by this church, and it just happened to be the church that they were looking for. And that's Faith Baptist Church down in Richmond.
Amen.
So that's where I was saved and baptized. It was, I think, about June. I was 4 years old. About June, would turn 5 in August. I was saved and baptized there. At that church. I had a Sunday school teacher. Her name was Miss Brenda Richardson, and she was one of their original bus kids when they started that church. The very first pictures that they have of that church is this building that looks about half fallen down, and there's a bus beside of it. And that was the beginning of their church. They started with a bus route.
Amen.
And Miss Brenda Richardson was one of the original bus kids. I was in her Sunday school class, and as we were leaving her Sunday school class, I remember her saying, if you're not saved, that's, you can talk to anybody, any of the teachers or anybody, and that's something that you can take care of. They can help you with. And I thought, well, sounds like something I need to take care of. And I'd heard the message before. So I went to my parents, and I remember my dad dealing with me, and that's when I was saved there.
Amen.
Was with my dad. As time went on, I went to public school there in Madison County. I met my wife in high school, my junior year of high school. I was in the concert band, played saxophone. That's where that came from, where I learned about music. And my wife was in the color guard, so we also did marching band. So my wife was in the color guard that does the flag twirling stuff. So that's where we met. And we just attended church when the doors were open. We were there.
Amen. When
there was any kind of event, revival, anything, we were always there. That's just the way we were brought up. There, I've obviously got multiple heroes, and I'll try to keep it together. Miss Brenda Richardson. There was a man named Kenneth Lovett.
Amen.
Who took me soul winning a lot as a kid. And he worked in a salvage yard, a little old salvage yard in Richmond on the other side of the train tracks, and drove a classic Ford unibody pickup truck of some sort. That's just what he always drove. And he was always at soul winning. He was always there. And as a kid, he was the most introverted, quiet guy that just never talked, but he would go out soul winning. I mean,
Amen.
He would go knocking on doors, and he took us, me and my brother, took us all the time, and it was just always there, faithful. Of course, Jack and Teresa Tribble, there may be some people here who know them.
Amen.
Brother Jack was the bus driver. He was the bus driver of that original bus, and drove a bus there until he passed away just a few years ago. So invested a lot of his life. I got my CDL license because of him.
Amen.
And of course, Carl Hatmaker.
Amen.
What a man.
Amen.
He loved Richmond. Everybody in Richmond knew him. There's used to be Patty A. Clay Hospital there. He visited that. I mean, the nurses knew him. He would walk in, they would just greet him. He went to the hospital just all the time. But the church was a labor of love for him. When they started that church, they literally dug the basement themselves by hand. And it's funny because he was like 6'9", big tall guy. And when they dug the basement by hand, they hit bedrock at some point. So there was like a step up in the basement. And when he went in that part of the basement, he had to bend his head like this because it wasn't high enough. But they just did what they had to do. They had a basement. It wasn't tall enough for him, but they made do. But they dug that by hand. So that just kind of shows just what that church meant to him.
Amen.
He did maintenance himself. We would walk in and go, well, Brother Carl's been spraying for bugs again. He'd use that pesticide that smelled like chemicals of some sort, but he just took care of all of it himself. But he said, go is in God and the gospel, and you can't satisfy either without go.
Amen.
Moving on, I went to EKU, graduated from there, and while I was in college, about 21 was when I had a desire to drive a bus. And as soon as I turned 21, I went and got my CDL license. I don't know if anybody knows this, but Brother Stone and I actually did that together.
Amen.
When we were there. We took the driver's test together. We failed it together. We went back and retook it together. And but got our licenses and started a route to Berea.
Amen.
And that was just, so many stories, and that was so much fun. We spent a lot of time together, and made a good friend there. I just wrote that some of my best memories are serving with people at church.
Amen.
I was married in 2007 to my wife Vanya.
Amen.
Our 15-year anniversary is next week.
Amen.
Amelia was born in 2010, and things changed. Things changed. So things changed for us for a little bit, and we ended up here at Mount Olivet in 2011.
Amen.
And then Amelia was only about one when we came here. So our other three children we've had here. I've continued to be able to use my CDL. That's something that God's always had in my heart. I don't drive a permanent route, but I've always been able to fill in as a substitute.
Amen.
I teach our college and career class, close to 8 years, 7 to 8 years, I believe. And when I was writing this, I said, I feel like my testimony is hardly my own. It's just following the footsteps of others.
Amen.
Carl Hatmaker used to say that I'm just one beggar telling another beggar where I found bread.
Amen.
And that's all I try to do. So, thank you, preacher.
Amen.